Hey, if you're a fan of Ronnie James Dio, this video is for you. You know, one of the things we do on this channel is we will go back to old newspapers, old magazines, and we will find articles, record reviews, concert reviews, that kind of thing. And every once in a while, I come across these cool articles that are basically kind of a profile, and it's being written because a particular artist is touring through a town and is going to be playing a concert, and so they'll just put a newspaper article about the band or about the artist or what have you. And this is one of those things. And what's interesting about these is that they do a profile about the artist, and a lot of times they would share insightful things that maybe even some of the fans didn't know. And this is an example of one of those things. This was published on January 10th of 1985, and Dio was about to play a concert here. This is in Ohio. The title of this article is Dio, Soft-Spoken Hard Rocker. And to put this in context from a time standpoint, he's touring on this album, The Last in Line, but this album had come out about seven months earlier, prior to this being published, when he was on this tour. This album came out on July 2nd of 1984. And anyway, so let me share this with you. I think you'll find some of these things kind of interesting in here. So the title of this article is Dio, Soft-Spoken Hard Rocker. And then the subtitle is Lung Power is His Stage Trademark. So let's see here. Talk about heavy metal, and you probably picture a tough-looking biker with chains instead of brains. You may not be prepared for Ronnie James Dio. He may dress in black leather, but he is that classically trained trumpet player with a degree in pharmacology who was offered a scholarship to the Juilliard School of Music. Quote, I started playing trumpet when I was 5, and I'm glad. It gave me an education in melody and structure that has stood me in good stead, he said in a telephone interview from Biloxi, Mississippi. Sure, we play hard rock. Some say it's raw, but it's not just headbanger music. We've got a lot of melody in there, he added. Dio also has a set of lungs in there that belies his short stature. Some headline writers have called him the man with the golden throat. And it's interesting thing that they mention the short stature. That was actually a real issue, especially when he went to go sing with Black Sabbath. A lot of people, like management for Black Sabbath, was pushing back on the idea of Ronnie James Dio singing for Black Sabbath because he was just this very, very short guy. He was about 5'4". They talk about that later in the article. Dio brings it all together tonight at 8 when the quartet that bears his name plays the Coliseum in Richfield. Dokken will open. Quote, just because the band has my name, I don't think of it as one-dimensional. We're a good mix. Our bass player, Jimmy Bain, is from Scotland. Our lead guitarist, Vivian Campbell, is from Belfast. And our drummer, Vinny Appice, is from Brooklyn. I want them all to shine, Dio added. Dio was born in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, but grew up in Cortland, New York, a town of 18,000, where you didn't have to lock your doors, he said. Quote, actually, I loved school, the whole educational process. I liked to learn English history, 4 years of Latin. I think it helps you later. See, I am an only child. My father worked in a steel mill. My mother worked in a factory. They couldn't go beyond high school, but they instilled in me the desire to keep going, Dio said. Dio isn't his real name. He shortened a long Italian one to sound snappier on stage. And they don't tell you what his real name was, but it's actually Padavona. In case you were curious, is Dio's last name, Padavona. I played basketball, soccer, and baseball in high school and wrestled, but I knew I didn't have a career there, not when you're 5'4", he said. Dio switched to bass in his late teens, then a guitar. He formed a hard rock band called Elf in the early 70s, which put out several albums. Quote, that was about the time our band opened a lot for Deep Purple. I felt I was part of the Purple family. I signed to Purple Records. I lived in England for 3 years, he said. That's when Dio met guitarist Ritchie Blackmore. When Deep Purple disbanded, Blackmore asked Dio to be the lead singer of his Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. And then, let me show you something here. So, speaking of that, I got this out. This is Rainbow's first album. This is Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. And I happen to have a copy of it here that's one of the copies that opens up. Not all of them did. So I'm going to show you something kind of interesting in here. So this is the inside of the album. And when you look right here, this is kind of an interesting thing because, of course, the band Elf, which had gone through several names before Elf, I think it was the Prophets, and then it was the Electric Elves, and then it was the Elves, and then it was Elf. When Ritchie Blackmore put this band together, he asked Dio, of course, who was the singer for Elf, to come be the singer for Rainbow. But what they don't mention here that's also kind of an interesting thing is when you look at the rest of this, Gary Driscoll, Craig Gruber, and Mickey Lee Soul, they were all in the band Elf. So basically what Ritchie Blackmore did was he took the band Elf and then he just became the guitarist and just created Rainbow out of this, for all intents and purposes, a previously existing band. And so Elf kind of came to an end and then Rainbow started. Anyway, just kind of an interesting thing to note that's really, if you didn't know, the band Rainbow was actually basically not just Dio coming from Elf, but he basically built the band Rainbow off of this pre-existing band called Elf. 6 years ago, Dio replaced Ozzy Osbourne in Black Sabbath. Then Dio left to form his own band. Actually, I never took lessons on the guitar. A lot of times what you teach yourself is the most important. I write my songs on my guitar. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing because when, as it says there, when Dio went and joined Black Sabbath, this was a different thing for them because Ozzy didn't really play any instruments to speak of, and he also wasn't really heavily involved in lyric writing. That was always a Geezer Butler thing in Black Sabbath. So when Dio joined Black Sabbath, he in some ways forced them to step their game up a little bit because he brought something to the band that they hadn't had before. Because Dio walks in and he's actually sitting with Tony Iommi with ideas on the guitar. And he's able to play the bass a little bit, and he's able to do these things so they're communicating on a different level. And then he also walks in as a lyricist. And you listen to Tony Iommi talk about this, and he kind of says, Dio forced us to step our game up a little bit because he brought something new. He brought a new energy. He brought this totally different type of talent to the band that Ozzy didn't have. And so it's just kind of interesting there that he talks about the fact that he wrote a lot of his music on the guitar, which was a new thing again for Black Sabbath. Some stories say that he likes to compose songs watching sports games on TV. True, he said, during sports games there isn't that dialogue to distract you. Dio will probably play Man on the Silver Mountain, a song he wrote when he was in Rainbow. But Rainbow in the Dark remains one of his favorites. And by the way, that, if you didn't know this, and if you're watching this, you probably do, but you'll see the first song on this album, Man on the Silver Mountain, that was the first song on the first Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow album, and that was the song they're talking about here. And it ended up becoming kind of a staple in Dio's live shows, and just for him, almost like a signature song for him over the years. And then Rainbow in the Dark was off of the first Dio solo album called Holy Diver. And it's just interesting here because he talks about the song Rainbow in the Dark here for a second. He goes, I love the symbolism in that. A rainbow needs so many things: reflected light, moisture. Put it in the dark, it's like putting it in a closet. It's like taking a beautiful thing and hiding it. It's the height of loneliness. Dio hasn't been lonely himself since Blackmore introduced him to a trim blonde named Wendy, who became his wife. Quote, that was the end of it for me, carousing, that is. She's the brightest person I've met in my life. We live in LA now. Dio will be back with the Egyptian set that it used at Public Music Hall August 11th. Expect a lot of shenanigans behind those British-built sphinxes and lights crisscrossing the stage in The Last in Line. That's the title song from the group's latest album. And again, that's the one that we're talking about here. And by the way, if you saw Dio on this tour with this set, please put that in the notes and tell us about what that experience was like, what you saw. What was the concert like, seeing him in this stage in his career? Because after Holy Diver had come out, that became in some ways kind of a staple of heavy metal. I mean, it's considered one of the greatest metal albums of all time. And then here's the follow-up. So he's established himself at this point. as a quote solo artist, or Dio, the band, has now really established itself in the greater heavy metal world. And so now he's on this second tour. What was that like? If you saw him on this tour, we'd love to hear about that. There have been times that Dio wishes he was a towering muscle man, though. Quote, "Our pyramid top arises to reveal the drums. Once when Vinny, the drummer, and I were inside the pyramid, the top didn't come off. It was really embarrassing," Dio said. What did he do? Just kept singing till the top moved. He felt like Radames buried in the tomb in Ada, he said. And that's the end of the article. And anyway, again, if you saw this concert, you'd know what they were talking about there. And I'd love to hear a little bit about what that was like, seeing that in person, this Egyptian set that he's talking about. Hey, anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Please, if you're not following the channel already, please follow the channel, like the video. Love to get your feedback on these things as always. And of course, have yourself a fantastic day.